Hey everybody, welcome to segment 2. Today I'm being frank about integrative medicine in the area of developmental disorders. On with me today is Ms. Janet Neal, who I am very eager for all of you to hear more about who she is, what she does, a little bit about her own illnesses of a developmental nature, which I've learned about, and how they can correspond with the other disorders we've touched on, like autism and Down syndrome, and to be able to expand further for listeners out there as to how to improve our quality of life. So, Janet, we were just touching upon both autism and Down syndrome as how these disorders are genetic in nature, but yet there are kind of nuances or gifts, as I call them, that are used when necessary. And I figured I'd like to hear more about your own experiences with these quote-unquote gifts, and even discuss further with everybody about how you became an advocate from both personal experience as well as what it is you're trying to accomplish now, especially in LA.
Okay. Background stuff. When I was when I was, I guess maybe elementary school, my grandmother's sister, my great aunt, had something called Stewart's Nursery in Compton, which was a foster home for children with severe disabilities. These kids were under 21, and they were not expected to live more than 6 months, so they would send them to her. Wow. So they would have a place. I just had a lot of trouble getting my head around that as a kid. Is why are these kids here and not at home with their parents? Mm-hmm. And it was explained to me that their parents didn't know what to do for them, as she did. Mm-hmm. And everybody belongs somewhere, and these kids belong there with her. Mm-hmm. These kids, as I said, were expected to die. Some of them were 21 years old and still in the cribs. Mm. And it became clear to me that people thrive when they're given care and attention and love. Yes. And some of these children that were expected to live, they took them away from her because they improved. Mm-hmm. And that was a big eye opener for me. And then going later into early childhood education and the rest of the things I did, but it also, I think, helped me to be strong in the diagnosis of my own disability. I have a genetic condition. It's linked to defective collagen. Anybody that's been to Cirque du Soleil, you've probably seen people with it, because those are the contortionists. If you've been to the circus, you've seen the contortionists. Mm-hmm. They probably have it. Houdini had this. Paganini had this. Rachmaninoff had this. They thought Rachmaninoff had an extra digit on his fingers to play those notes on the violin, but It was actually the Ehlers-Danlos syndrome that allowed him to be hypermobile to reach those notes. The same thing with Rachmaninoff on the piano. Mm-hmm. The same thing with Houdini. All of those things that he could do is because of the Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Wow. It is a very rare connective tissue disease. I think part of the problem with me being diagnosed is I do not fit the visual profile. It is people of Western European ancestry, and I'm black. So It made it even more difficult for it to be diagnosed. But the interesting thing is that I have it on both sides of the family, which is very rare. One of my grandmother's sisters died from the vascular type, which I do not have. I have the hypermobile type. Interesting. I think in the news everybody's heard of John Ritter. Yes. The actor John Ritter. He had a form of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. There was a local basketball player, Hank Gathers, that was playing basketball and died on the basketball court from the complications of type 4, the vascular type of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Wow. When you hear people with ruptured aortic arches, prolapsed mitral valve, that's probably Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. It's related to something called Marfan syndrome, which is, we can bring up an image of Abraham Lincoln, and you see the hanging jowls and creases in his face, and his long fingers, his height, and his knobby knees, that is a sign of Marfan syndrome.
Wow. And yet, as I've been saying, they have these extraordinary talents and have been able to succeed in the entertainment industry, in political means, in very creative means that most people, I guess, can only aspire to trying at one point in their life. But how would you classify, one, if any of those disorders have anything to do with Down syndrome or even autism? Maybe they don't. Maybe there's a connection that you could describe a little bit about. And
I don't know of a specific link, but it doesn't mean that there isn't. It's just there's no research.
Right.
And I would have to say, if there the connection, to me, in my opinion, would be a neurological connection.
Exactly.
With the Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, there is, because you have a tendency to dislocate your joints. They come out of place on their own when you don't have the strength like the Cirque du Soleil people do to keep it in place.
Yeah.
This will cause some neurological issues based on nerve damage.
Wow.
I have neuropathy from the nerve damage from the dislocation.
Oh, is there any connection to also diabetes in your case, or no?
I don't, not that I know of, but it doesn't mean that there isn't. It's just there's no research.
Understood.
You know, and that's, to me, the part of the problem with the orphan diseases is there's no research.
Something that we definitely have to change, I guess.
Yeah, there's no research, there's no treatment, there's no medication. A lot of the individuals that have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome like I do, and there's 3 or 4 different types, some of them have morphine pumps. And I just decided that I wasn't going that direction. In their 30s, they've had bilateral knee replacements, hip replacements, shoulder replacement, finger fusions, spinal fusions, neck fusion, prolapse, kidneys, all of these different things. And it just, there's no treatment for that. There's nothing you can do to fix that. Replacing the knee doesn't really work. Unfortunately, some of these people were misdiagnosed as something else, and that's very, very common. And so it presented as loose or lax joints, with the ligaments being too long and not stabilizing the joint. So they did surgery, to shorten the ligament, but that doesn't work because it doesn't heal properly. It comes loose. The surgery comes loose. And they have to go back in there again and take a little bit more tendon, and ultimately you will end up with a fused joint, which is going to wear the joint out, and you'll end up having to replace it, because I mentioned the knee replacements, and I said bilateral, which means it's been replaced twice.
Wow.
And these are people in their 30s. They also have heart attacks. People having heart attacks in their 30s is just unheard of, and which, back to John Ritter again, his brother, Tom Ritter, who I'm very well acquainted with also, was a member of the city's Commission on Disability when I was on that commission, went and had some corrective surgery. John Ritter knew that there was something wrong. He just did not deal with it.
Do you think that he knew any of that when he was on the set of Three's Company, or even his other show, 8 Simple Rules? I mean, it's like...
And
wow.
by the way, Rita worked on that show.
Yes. At the Regal Beagle. But either way, I mean, the thing that continues to amaze me, even though we had a brief discussion about this yesterday, is that the research, I don't think it's even applied or aggressively pursued. That in itself disturbs me. But yet, as I've discovered from my own disorder or life with epilepsy, it's when you take the initiative to do the research and really interpret and understand, you find yourself being, in a position to help provide added value to the medical practitioners out there. And I think that, using this show as a means, especially with someone like you, I just hope that when this show streams all over the place, that there will be some impact going forward. The thing
I find that, you have to be your own advocate. When you know something is wrong, and if you have pain, don't let somebody convince you that you don't.
Right.
You know, if you don't feel well, don't let somebody convince you that you're making it up. You know, I like I said, I heard that all my life from a kid.
Mm-hmm.
I always heard that. You know, I was making it up. But you have to advocate for yourself.
Yes.
And as you go through the litany of doctors that you may have to see,
mm-hmm.
you have one that says, I don't see anything, then you move on.
Yes.
Find another one.
Yes.
Until you find somebody that's willing to work with you symptomatically until they can figure it out.
Yep.
I think this particular disease has a lot of problems with pain management.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned the morphine pumps, but I also had another friend who they have given her fentanyl pops. I think fentanyl has been in the news a lot because it's a very powerful drug. Mm-hmm. And they usually give fentanyl pops, that's a lollipop, to terminal cancer patients.
Really?
This lady was in her 30s. And they decided all of this, trying to deal with this, affected her personality.
Wow.
So she ended up with some mental health issues, and the last I heard, because her family did an intervention that went really wrong, went badly, and she ended up institutionalized when really the only thing wrong with her is that she has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And she's just trying to live with it. And it's just very hard for her.
Yeah, so the lack of understanding and proper treatment made it a comorbidity, which really ended up being the primary disease for her.
Yeah, because then it goes into the mental health aspect of things, and now you've got a compound problem where because your behavior, which is a reaction to the condition, is in the way of the treatment.
Right.
That you need to have to try and make you physically more comfortable because you are in emotional or psychological agony.
Correct. I mean, it's like the people with Down syndrome. Essentially, it is a third copy of a chromosome, and that is what creates an entire longevity, a life of having to deal with continued treatments and screening because of any simple health problem, like, for example, the flu. And I guess what I find interesting is that when you have things like, okay, they have a certain facial look about them, but they also have an IQ of 50, the typical 6 or 8 year old. I mean, that's one aspect with the gifts that they have to make things constructive, and yet they have to be to be monitored, because it sounds like to me similar to that person you mentioned that ended up being institutionalized. The comorbidity becomes the reality, and still the lack of understanding and lack of research leaves everybody still in a quandary.
Lack of understanding and I think acceptance. You know, just because I don't understand something doesn't mean that I can't accept that there is an issue here. And I think that that's a problem with people, that because they can't see it, or they've never heard of it, I don't believe you, and you look okay to me.
Yes.
You know, we get that a lot. We call them also hidden disabilities.
Well, speaking about hidden, we're about to take another break, but I do want to talk to you about these aspects because of the fact that I know you've been doing a lot of research in LA and working on a lot of, I guess you could say, programs and campaigns and fundraising efforts to really support these kinds of research that need to be conducted. So I guess I could just say, when we come back, I really want you to go right for the kill and describe all of this, because as you know, I found it informative yesterday.
All righty.
All right, hear you in a bit.
All right.